Hello, this is Greg Alice from Green Greg's Garden and Worm Farm, coming to you on the 28th of June, 2020. Had to double check. And we have a special guest appearing again on our channel for the second time, David DuByne. David DuByne is of the channel Adapt 2030. He started that channel because he recognized that we had food shortages coming up due to climatic changes, essentially grand solar minimum and what that entails. David DuByne has had the interesting life experience of having lived in Southeast Asia. He's lived in China, and lastly was living in Taiwan, and he made an exit when he was afraid he wouldn't be able to get out of there and come home. So he made a quick exit and came back home to the United States, to East Tennessee, from which he's from. And David has taken it upon himself to start a farm project there, and he's establishing what's a survival tribe along the lines of what I've been talking about on my channel. And he and I have been discussing this, and he's going to fit into this network as a survival tribe up in East Tennessee. And from the email I'm getting, it looks like we're going to have probably multiple survival tribes in that area. There's a lot of interest in East Tennessee. So before we get into David and his experiences, we're going to talk about what's happening in China right now with the floods, what kind of pressure that's putting on the Chinese. He'll talk about some of the historical context of this. He'll talk also about why this matters in terms of, will China get more aggressive? Will they just choose to wag the dog? How will it affect us here? There are many ways it might affect us here. And he will also talk about what he's doing about it, where he's at, how we're going to try to get through this and survive, thrive, and stay out of the hive, come out on the other side alive. So before I get into that, I want to say I've got a lot of videos coming up on subjects like this, on farming, growing your own food, how to eat from the wild. So you do want to subscribe to my channel, because I cover topics about keeping your eyes wide open and head on the swivel. You need to look out for it, like we're talking tonight. I'm also talking about, in a lot of my videos, about what we need to do about it, including our survival tribes and things that you can write to your congressman about. I cover these kind of things. And you got to listen to the end of these videos sometimes to catch that and check some of the links in the video notes. But speaking of that, you always check the video notes in the videos, click more on them. But subscribe to my channel to get more updates to these videos. And bang the bell for update notifications and click all. And to support my channel, click the links below, please. I have links for True Leaf Market, which Dave also is a big supporter of, and quite entwined in. He's used them quite a bit himself and has promoted that channel himself. True Leaf Market, of course, is a source that you can buy heirloom seeds from. Heirloom seeds are what you require to be able to plant seeds, harvest a plant, take the seeds and replant them and get the same plant. You will not get the same plant back if you plant seeds from a hybrid plant. You're going to get something lesser than what you started with. So use heirloom seeds. And you may be in a city, you may be in a condo, or in some place where you really can't garden outdoors. You can grow indoors with microgreens. You can get all the microgreen supplies you need from True Leaf Market. David's been promoting True Leaf Market and microgreens for years. And you can look at my channel. I've got videos to show you how to grow them inside your home. I've grown them inside my living room. Just check the videos, go down my channel and look through the various lists. And also you can click videos in the upper left-hand corner, and you can see tons of videos that don't show up in the playlist, because you just can't put everything in these playlists. They're limited. That said, also I do have a special right now for a 1 month, $100 off on long-term food storage with prepwithgreg.com. Go to prepwithgreg.com, and that takes you, and you link below for that too. That will also take you into My Patriot Supply. If you click around on that page, it'll take you into My Patriot Supply, and you get all kind of prepping supplies there, and that helps my channel too. All right, that said, David, it's a real pleasure to have you again on my channel for the second time here. You're quite an inspiration. You've done a lot of work talking about grand solar minimum and what that means for food supplies. You and I talked about the supply chain in the past and how things are going down or breaking the supply chain, and we're beginning to really see that. But now it's being compounded by weather. It's being compounded by political strife here in this country. We're having all kinds of new dimensions. It's just making this year go nuts. What do you think about the floods in China and Yangtze River Valley, where there's home to 400 million people, more than the United States. 40% of the GDP, 40% of the grain in China is grown there. And it looks to me like that will be at risk. What does that mean for the Chinese country, the people, the stability of the CCP, and will they do something foolish?
Wish I had those answers with you. The best I can do is maybe connect a couple dots and then move from there. But Greg, thanks for having me on the show. We're gonna have a great conversation. As always, it is about the food and, micronutrients in the microgreens after you grow. Just a quick caveat into this. In the grand solar minimum, one of the things people routinely had happen to them over the last, say, 4 or 5 of these 400-year events that occur in a cycle, they ended up getting sick because their immune systems were really low because they're eating poor quality foods. But having microgreens, incredible, micro-dense, nutrient-dense superfoods, is going to keep you a cut above the rest in terms of your health. Not a doctor, not advocating anything. All I'm saying is microgreens per gram or per ounce compared to regular vegetables exponentially above in terms of micronutrients to keep your body healthy and keep your immune system functioning. It's just basics. If you eat more fruits and vegetables, you're going to have more vitamin C in your body. That's the whole thing about keeping you not as easy to contract things. So others around you might get sick, but because you have a high nutrient diet, high vitamin diet, which microgreens provide, you might not get sick from the same thing people are, others around you. That's why they always say, take a lot of vitamin C, during the winter time. And if you do, you notice that sometimes you don't get sick, but others around you do. It's just a difference in what you're consuming in your body to keep your immune system at a higher functioning level. And those microgreens are super easy. And I think it is going to be a solution for the grand solar minimum, having and being able to grow your own microgreens. I really believe that will be part of the solution, but it's going to take an enormous amount of solutions to do that. So that'll be one of the easiest that you can implement. So how does that kick into the Chinese cycle with the locusts down in South America with what we're seeing on these 400-year cycles? To start in China, the Three Gorges Dam, in my personal opinion, is not going to collapse. What is going to happen is the flood control is going to get completely out of control. They've had so much water coming into that China went to incredibly low, almost the lowest that dam volume and the reservoir behind it can go. They've been letting as much water as they can out, and they can down about 145 meter depth there. It can go up to 185 meters before it overtops. So when you're looking at top level water, when they tested it before at 175 meters compared to 140 meters, that's almost 100-foot more of water. And you have to realize the reservoir is like 300 miles long. I know it's not as deep at the higher edge toward Chongqing coming in, but that reservoir is 300 miles long, and you could put another 100-foot depth of water in there before there'd be any chance of it overtopping. So what the Chinese government's doing is letting that thing free flow, and the volume on it is 30,000 cubic meters of water per second. It's the world's largest dam. But then you got to realize downstream, the dams are nowhere near close, that kind of throughput for water. The next largest dam heading downstream is 18,000 cubic meters per second. That's a monster in comparison. And then when you go even further down, and some of the tributaries coming in there that would be inundated themselves as catchment basins, they can run through like 5,000 cubic meters a second, 8,000, 10,000 cubic meters per second. But upstream, they're spilling through 3 times the volume that some of the smaller and medium-sized dams could handle. So what they're doing, instead of overtopping the dams further downstream, they're just opening it, and then they have these kind of what they call sluice gates off the sides that allow to flood back into the farm fields, which they were previously protecting. So they're letting the water run through the sluice gates off the side to flood the farmland so the dam won't overtop. The full dam under is 5,000 cubic meters a second, 10,000 cubic meters a second, full open. And then they're still having too much water coming through. Then the flood water is off the sluice going out into the farm fields. And we're talking like, 50 miles that way and 50 miles that way, completely flooded, just keeps heading downstream, because before that was dammed up, that's why they call it the Yellow River, the Huanghe and the Yangtze, and all these different basins that you hear about. The reason the Yangtze and the Yellow River, the reason it was so bountiful around these areas in the flood river deltas is because every year it would flood, and then as it receded, it left all that really good soil down there. That's why they had such bountiful harvest. But since they're controlling it, farmers need to use more fertilizers and whatnot, but they're going to be completely flooded out in their farmland. If what's coming up have to be released through the Three Gorges Dam at full flow, everything down below it's going to be completely inundated. So what does that kick off to then? Well, China would need to import more food. Where are they importing from now?
Here in part.
Yeah, South America, United States. But caveat, the locust swarms down in South America now are becoming into the trillions, where they're swarming to the point where it's making international news. It's a third continent with massive swarms on it. Asia already has massive locusts, which have made it to China. From all the way in the Middle East and Africa, these giant swarms we keep hearing about in the news from the FAO, or the Food Organization of the United Nations. We've heard about that for 6 months. That has finally got to China. So those swarms are into China, which is another detriment along with the floods. But then South America also now has the locust swarms that are going to come up to Venezuela and then go around through Mexico and come up to the United States, probably in the first weeks of August. But remember, our plants are still maturing then. So if these massive 100 trillion swarms of locusts get up into our corn, soybean, and sorghum fields, we're going to have a difficulty trying to eradicate them or even combat them.
Has South America had problems with locusts in the past?
They have. Back in 1861 was the last major outbreak. So I'm trying to do a little bit of correlation there with the solar cycles. Is it at low solar activity, and was there a desert dust storm like the 100-year storm that we just saw off the Sahara, mixed in with the locust infestations in South America? Because it was well recorded in 1861, they were completely eaten out. They had a famine down there for almost 2 years because there's so many locusts. And at that time, there was better shipping, of course. We started to have steamships and whatnot. So it wasn't as bad as if they would have been in the 1600s, right? With everything going by sails. But there's repeating cycles there for sure. So if China loses Brazil and Argentina as their major suppliers for soya and different kind of imported grains, and then they move to the United States, got the trade war, what's going to happen? And then they get flooded out and they lose an enormous amount of their crop there. So if they lose their crop from the floods, they're instantly going to be out on the market looking for food. Australia's in a mega drought. They're not able to grow so much and export. Australia is now a net wheat importer. So anything China was buying from Australia has gone by the wayside. And then we're just left South America, but they've been buying voraciously there. They call it the grain superhighway. Did a whole video about that, China buying so much grain from Argentina and Brazil. The ship tracker is just like a solid green line going back to Asia. Leaves us with the United States. And what if we decide to say, hey, we'll charge a double price, or we don't want to sell, it's a trade war. It's all about the food now. Sorry, man, I rambled too much there. Sorry, Greg, I'll let you jump in. That's it in a nutshell.
You're on a good roll. I mean, you're making a good point.
That's a nutshell right there.
So basically, they're not going to be producing near as much in China because 40% of the grain is grown in the Yangtze River Valley there. I don't, right now they're claiming like 2 million acres are at risk, but I think it's a lot more than that. That sounds to me like a lot of the other numbers we've heard coming out of that sector of the country. But I really don't trust those numbers because, if you said they're flooding stuff out sluice gates 50 miles one way and 50 miles the other way, they're covering a huge territory with that water.
Huge.
So yeah, those numbers don't even make walking around sense. So yeah, they're at grave risk on the food supply. Given that, they're also now, as you're saying, at risk from not being able to buy as much from overseas, from South America. There's probably going to be a lot of demand for what we have here. We've had crop shortages just a little bit last year, even though USDA reported, and they were counting crops in the field, and I'm sure a lot of those were plowed under this spring for being no good because they stayed in the field all winter. So it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. It's going to be interesting to see how these locusts affect China. How far do you think they would come into the United States? Did they do that in the 1800s? Because the West wasn't that far foreign back in the 1800s like it is now. They were just getting into Kansas and a lot of those places like that at the time. So what do you think the prospects are for the locusts coming in up here, and how far do you think they'll reach before they peter out? I mean, August starts getting toward the end of their season, I would think.
Yeah, now in 1861, you have to realize that Mexico wasn't as heavily the agribusiness hadn't farmed everything and set up fields. So there was a vast gap of desert, whereas now farm fields in Mexico. So they've really turned that into a breadbasket by farming a lot of things like we did in the United States. We took areas that weren't farmed before and turned them into farming areas. So there was a natural gap of an enormous amount of desert there in Mexico before even, and then when it came into the United States, we weren't out there farming in the West where there was a lot of vegetation for them to eat in the 1860s. Because even in California, they didn't even really get out there to what, 1849, 1850. They were looking for gold, not agriculture. They weren't planting a lot of lettuces and, you know, the lettuce salad bowl of the world's in California. Like there's a lot more vegetation for those things to nibble on all the way up to North America or into the United States through North America than there was back in the 1800s. Now, the next best guess I could say is 1921. In the early 1920s, we had a massive outbreak of locusts here in the U.S.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it caused huge shortages of, you know, prices rose for everything because people were eating out of house at home, literally.
They were mainly in the Midwest, if I recall.
Mainly in the Midwest, yeah.
I don't know of us ever having a locust swarm here in the Southeast. Have you heard of that?
I haven't, because all those black and white photos that I'd seen from the 1920s were all, yeah, right down in the breadbasket of what we consider right now from Texas over through into, let's say, up to Kansas and whatnot, that whole area there. That's why I'm a fan of putting things indoors. Now, with the grand solar minimum, knowing there's going to be massive changes in terms of snowfall, hail, wind, anomalous rains, and extreme droughts and things, really switching up the weather. If you put everything under cover, you can control it much more. And that would include the invasive locusts. So they could swing by an entire field, eat everything down to the nub, but they're sure not going to be coming in your hoop house or your dome greenhouses.
Yeah, I have a greenhouse, but it don't cover everything I've got, but it's a start.
It's a start. Yeah, and in a pinch, you could run out and grab a bunch of you know, netting or whatever to throw over there just to keep them out.
Oh yeah, I could do that because most of my beds are raised beds, and you know, it's a limited area. I could put stuff. If I knew they were coming, I could put up stuff. I could actually put up hoops and put things over them. I mean, it's easy with PVC pipe and different things like that. You can put them together real fast. You don't have to take them through the bender and things like that. I've already built one greenhouse that way, so it was kind of an interesting experience. My first greenhouse was 24 by 75 foot, so that was my first little test article.
That's a decent size, 75 feet long. Yeah.
Yeah. So I plan to put another one in, maybe 95, maybe 90 foot long. I have to see what I can do in my other little location where I plan to put a greenhouse. But I could go in and put hoop houses over just, you know, caterpillar tunnels or something like that. It'll be real easy to put up over the rest of the garden if I need to.
Yeah, you need to get on the sacred geometry, 360 feet long by 18 feet wide, you know, so like that, so you can walk through and put some small plants in there. And about getting the headroom, you know, can you walk in? I don't want to have to squat down and walk through a hoop house. You need to be able to get in there fully upright, you know, carrying a tool with you or something.
David needs a lot of headroom, folks.
Yeah.
How tall are you, David?
Oh, 6'3".
6'3", okay.
Ish. With the heels, you know, whenever
I think you're probably higher than that without heels, barefooted. Yeah, I think you're being modest. Anyway, so the case is that China is under a lot of pressure, and it's not just agriculture. Their GDP is going to be affected too. We know their GDP is affected by shutdowns that they've already experienced due to dealing with the pandemic. So they're going to be facing economic crises, food crises, and even if they're buying food and finding it, they're going to be paying a lot more money for it. That's going to hit them economically. I see this as putting a lot of pressure on the party, on the CCP, the party in charge. And I think that pressure will go up as we go deeper into the grand solar minimum. So, you know, a lot of times when a party is under pressure and the populace is getting very unhappy with it, they will try to divert the attention of their people to external affairs by getting involved in military engagements. It's called wag the dog for those that don't know. And I've used that term a fair bit recently. Maybe I did not define it well enough, but that's what it really is. There was a movie about that at one time.
Yeah, Dustin Hoffman, right?
So what do you think about that? What do you think? You know the people, you've been there, you know the culture. What do you think of the prospects for a wag the dog as a consequence of this?
I went back about 3,500 years to the furthest back, even into the Warring States period, which preceded the first emperor Huang, which you see the terracotta warriors and all that stuff out in there, Xi'an. That was the first emperor Huang, the Huang dynasty. If you go further back in, you find all these warring states, kingdoms, and different fiefdoms fighting amongst each other to come up and bring to what we know China today. So Huang unified all those independent kingdoms and fiefdoms under one unified rule. But before that, they were even fighting. And if you take it back, you can find on those 400-year cycles, even the Warring States period, you can find that they're falling also. There was a lot more conflict on those 400-year cycles. And then Emperor Huang united it together. And here's the interesting thing, is since that point, every 400 years, dynasties change. Now, some of them are not exactly 400 years. Some of them are like 360 years, 380. But I encourage you to do some research in history that no Chinese dynasty has ever lasted longer than 400 years, ever, never. What's the catalyst? What changed? Because those emperors back then were much more ferocious and just so much more brutal than you can possibly imagine. You think CCP doing their things today, it's not even 1/5 of 1/8 of how brutal it was back then when they just did, well, the things you read about in history, the way they kept power, there was no holds barred and nothing was too brutal to keep that power going. So knowing that, and then, why did they keep collapsing and new dynasties emerging out? Well, you find the same fingerprints again through this whole Chinese dynasty collapse and reemergence. Something happened with the weather. The people were not able to be fed. Military overthrew the dictator, or the emperors of the time, because they were not being fed and their families weren't being fed and their families weren't being taken care of. They weren't being paid, and everything just went completely haywire, where food seemed to be the main driver in all the changes. Now, starting to couple that with this grand solar minimum, more research I did, the more every time you learn about the historical agreed upon collapse dates and reasons for it, it's always the same thing: plagues, famine, rebellion of the army, and the collapse of the economy. So however Xi wants to try to hold power, just history is completely against him on this time, because if we start to see the same thing, you got 400 people, let's say they all have to move because of the floods. Let's say 100 million had to move, not 400, just 100 million. Where are they going to go? Because they'd have to really relocate. Now, they could go to those ghost cities that have been built out, like we've heard about through the last few years. But then if the farm fields are completely flooded, now here's another thing. They didn't really plant on time this year because of the COVID. So China really was much more, let's say, aggressive in locking people in their homes, apartments, cities, countryside, whatever. You saw even out in countryside places where they put up wooden slats on the doors and nailed people in their homes so they couldn't come out. So even farmers were being arrested in the fields. I saw this one craziest video. This guy's like a little speck out in the fields. It must have been like 200-300 acres. He's a little speck, one guy, and way out there, you could barely see him. And all these police ran up and surrounded him and arrested him. It was one farmer way out in the middle of the field trying to tend to his fields. It went to that level. So the amount of planting this year was super reduced anyway. And now we have the floods coming in. So even if they just planted, an established plant can handle a flood much more than a brand new little seedling that's coming up, or something that's in the grass stage, like wheat, wheatgrass coming up. If it gets flooded, it's going to die much more easily. So the planting was at least 6 weeks behind, maybe longer, 8 weeks behind. I was even doubtful that they'd get the full crop ready before the cold came, because they were that far behind on the planting, especially in the north areas. Heilongjiang and that whole area were never really planted this year, and it's still not. But then central area, what you're talking about, that was the center of the center, Wuhan, that's in that same crop growing area you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. If people have to leave, that's a caveat. And then if they can't grow the food, that's it. So you got all these extra factors just kind of adding up on top of it. So it's not just one thing they're going to have to worry about.
So I did a video about this, my last video, in fact, and I painted it both as a opportunity and a peril. The opportunity would be that the people would see this and overthrow the CCP, and maybe they would choose to go with a government that was more democratic, or at least less aggressive militarily than what we're facing right now. Now that's one possibility. It's not the only possibility, but I believe we can hope for that. I think the people in Hong Kong and Taiwan definitely have had a taste for that. If they could be very instructed, the people inside of China, they would help encourage them in that direction. Now, that's not saying it would fall down that way, that the chips would fall out that way. How do you think the chips would fall, David, if the CCP found themselves out of power?
Well, there would be a vacuum in there for sure. Now, how the vacuum would recompress on itself in China is a whole different thing, because you have to realize when Xi came to power, there were a lot of very other powerful politicians in different regional areas. Was it Bohe? That's peppermint, spearmint in the name in Chinese. Bo Xilai, that was his name. He got taken out in West. He was like the #2 powerful. So if you go back to the emperor days, he would have been his own warlord, fiefdom, kingdom leader out there in the West in Sichuan. Mm-hmm. But when Xi came to power, he was like, all right, I got all these other political rivals around me, so I'm going to he took everybody out. But if everything would have stayed the same and he would have had these political elite controlling their own regional areas, if the CCP fell, it would break up into smaller pieces, and like Bo Xilai would have controlled that whole Chongqing, Sichuan area out there, and would have had it under control pretty quickly, because they had the allegiance of the military, the police, the financial elite out there as well. So everything would have stayed, and they could have traded around, and they could have still got imports coming in, and the country could have sort of functioned, or the region could have sort of functioned within the larger countryscape itself. But all those people have been removed completely.
I've seen speculation that China would actually fracture into a number of different countries, like Sichuan, Tibet, that there would be several countries that it would break into, just like the Soviet Union broke up into different countries. So do you think that's still feasible, or do you think that's kind of out?
It's totally on the table. And I think the same thing with the United States. That could very well happen here. You know, you might think we're impervious to that, but I really say the way things are heading politically right now, it's very possible that the U.S. could break up into regional areas, because I know here in the Southeast U.S., we certainly wouldn't accept that what's happening out in California as a whole thing. Like, everybody in the whole country do that. We'd be like, all right, y'all out on the West Coast can do your own thing, but we're not going to adopt that over here. Same thing, if Xi falls in power over there, then the power vacuum is going to be who's going to take control second. Because if the whole CCP power structure falls, then the entire leadership of the entire country, of all those people put in place to keep the manufacturing going, to keep the shipping running, keep the banking moving. Like, you don't get to those upper echelons of power in those positions of what we consider like CEOs, CFOs, et cetera, of these companies that keep that whole mechanism of food delivery, utilities running. You don't get to those positions unless you are a 100% cadre, 100% with the CCP, or you're not even considered. You had to go through the very base beginning of getting into those kind of CCP groups in middle school, high school. You were the leader of the CCP union and whatever it was for your university, and then you had to pledge your allegiance and work your way up through the party. Like, you just don't go and go, hey, I want to be a CCP physician today. Can I be? No, you had to prove it from, literally when you're 5, 10 years old, and your family had to be in it too. A lot of times you won't be considered for those positions until you're like 3rd generation CCP officials. So if they remove that, then everybody's going to be like, well, what to do next? I think it would fall apart first before there'd be some reorganization, and the mafia would probably take over in the beginning, because the organized crime would probably, take over where the government officials had fallen off. Because you find through history a lot of times, like the mafia would control the business, and for a while it was like a lot of the, let's say, the coastal areas were controlled by mafia. And they were the ones running the business. And that's the way it was. Now, not to consider like mafia, like we understand, it was a different one. They were more business oriented, keep control with their own private police forces to make sure that their own goods didn't get hijacked out. And they still were more on the side of the average person to get goods and services delivered without too heavy taxation. And they had their own just reign of business and power within those areas for hundreds of years, I should say, plural. And then the British come in and had a little conflict with that, but then there was still a lot of that organized crime stuff going on. It's still very ingrained in the culture. It is part of the business, and you'll find that intertwined between like organized crime and high officialdom inside there. So there's a very fine line between one and the other. I just don't know how it would be if it collapsed, because you have to ask about the same thing. If the United States broke up like the Soviet Union did, how would we restructure here? That's a better way to look at it too. Like, what would happen in the power vacuum here if we broke up and the Southeast United States was one new territory. California, West Coast, Oregon, Washington was its own territory out there. And then like the Midwest was its own and the Northeast was its own. How would we restructure it here? You'd have to ask her the same, because I don't have an answer for that either. Definitely a power vacuum would form and be filled.
Well, I did a video with Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, and we talked about things like when a lot of countries fell because of marauding gangs like the Goths, the Vandals, and so forth that raided Rome, it really caused the empire to fall. And, you know, we got kind of an internal thing like that going on here. And he suggested that every time the Sea people took down the Hittite Empire way back when, and every time one of these empires is fallen, it's taken longer and longer for society and civilization to reestablish them. After the Hittite, and all the empires except for Egypt were taken out by the Sea people, it took centuries to recover, but after the Rome fell, it took 1,000 years to recover. And what would happen today? We're so far up, we're so high, that if our civilization gets shattered, our civilization is very fragile. We talked about the intricacies of the supply chain and how it takes so many little pieces and parts. And I've done a program called iPencil, a program on a story called iPencil. I talk about the fragility of civilization is the name of the video, where I discussed just how complex it was in the 1950s to make a number 2 pencil. And you just multiply that by many orders of magnitude today. That cast of tens of thousands of people to pull it off, hundreds of thousands. We're so complex today that if you break this egg, it's like Humpty Dumpty. All the king's horses and all the king's men just can't put it back together again. So we could be in real peril of going into a dark age if it's allowed to be totally taken down. Now, I think in some regions, like you mentioned here in the Southeast, I don't think we'll tolerate it. I don't think it's going to push that far in this area. They might try, but I really just don't see that coming to pass. Other areas in the country may fall a lot farther, a lot faster. But one thing that I'm worried about, David, is the prospects that China might, if they choose to wag the dog to try to preserve their empire, they might get more aggressive in the South China Sea with India. They probably see the United States as being their big number one impediment toward taking things they want in their own area, because we're not standing for it. We're involved. And they might just decide to take us out. And the easier way to take us out would be an EMP attack. An EMP superweapon can put out 200,000 volts per meter on a wire. Military hardened installations are hardened to 50,000 volts per meter. At the edge of the field, at the edge of the continent, it would still be at that, right at the military hardened range. But in the middle of the continent, it would be, and most of the continent, it would be above that. It would exceed it. So we would lose command and control and electronics capabilities, even for our ICBM fleet that's sitting in the ground waiting to launch a countermeasure that would be gone. And that could also affect submarines. They've got ways to take out a lot of our systems. If they were going to do this ahead of time, they'd already have plotted out our aircraft carrier and the networks, everything. So they would choose to do something like that. There's some concerns that they've been planning these attacks for some time. And that's one of my top concerns. What do you think about it?
Well, it depends how much they want to eat, because you have to realize Brazil and Argentina and other places that grow in a lot of the different, grains that they import, a lot of the base materials in turn the fertilizers and soil remediation and equipment and that sort of thing comes from the United States down there. I'm not saying all by any means, but some. It'll definitely be affected if the United States got completely cut off. The rest of the world's agriculture would suffer. So, and then also China is importing a lot. And Brazil and Argentina and South America can only supply so much of China's needs. So can Europe, but even combined, they can only supply so much. And then Europe relies on the United States for some exports too. So if the food went away, literally like all the exports stopped out of the United States to Europe, everybody would just kind of close up shop and be like, we're not selling any food. We need it all for ourselves because America was supplying with so much that we can't even get enough for our own people. We're sure not going to be exporting. So by doing that, China would almost cut its own foot off, because unless they're willing to lose hundreds of millions of people to starvation and a full-on revolt and complete rework of the government,
or unless they're willing to invade. What if they were to have an invasion plan? I think they'd take down most of this country with EMP and just take the western part of the country in the Midwest, where we produce so much food. and it won't be so irradiated by all our nuclear power plants to be going off, which are predominantly in the east. So maybe they would have a plan like that, and just try to take part of the country after an event like that. And there are some that are projected that. Mike
But
Adams.
those nuclear power plants, as soon as they go off, it's just going to keep circulating around the northern hemisphere. It's not like it just stops when it gets out in the ocean and then that's it. It's going to keep going floating around, you know? And imagine if you had 15, 20, 30, 40 of them. Okay, Fukushima was bad enough. Chernobyl was bad enough. Now multiply that by 40, and they're going to be sending that stuff right back on their own people and their own land, you know? Plus they're going to irradiate the food supply.
Well, the heaviest elements will fall out within 20 miles of the nuclear power plant, 30 miles. But there are elements, the lighter ones will travel worldwide. We did get it from Fukushima. So cesium and you know, the cesium elements, I think it was cesium 137, I think. I have to go back and double check. But some of these things did travel globally.
Now, would they be, I mean, how detrimental is that to have, you know, let's say 40 nuclear power plants go up and send the cesium around and get a 40x increase in the cesium amounts on top of what we already saw from other accidents globally? I mean, how detrimental would that be for human health? Do you have the answer? I don't.
Not good. Well, let me put it this way. There are about 300 times more radioactive material just in the spent fuel rod pools of the nuclear power plants than there are inside of all the warheads on Earth. So we worry about the radiological effects of a nuclear war. People talk about that all the time. That's nothing compared to just what is in the spent fuel rods of the power plants. Nothing. Just a match next to a stick of dynamite. So it's a huge difference. And well, this is why I've been pushing to get the grid hardened, because even if somebody doesn't do it, like a mad Kim Jong-un, or if you don't have somebody else like Iran, if we're not attacked by North Korea, Iran, or China, or Russia, it's a possibility that, and of course they might attack us because they think we're going to hit them. That's another possibility. But the sun will get us eventually. Eventually the sun will take down our power grid if we don't get it hardened. This is why, first and foremost, we need to get our power grid hardened. A lot of people say, well, it's going to be an inside job or a government. The biggest inside job is the fact that our bureaucracy fails to follow the law to get the power grid hardened. Or dragging their feet. So if you want to blame it on our side, you want to blame on bureaucracy. They don't have to intentionally do anything other than to continue their inaction. That inaction is treasonous, in my opinion. And we talked about that in the video I did with Dr. Pry, Peter Vincent Pry. So check that out. Everybody should look at that video. It's very instructive.
I'll put the link below in the description box too. I'd like to check that one out.
Okay, all right. I'll put that up front. And I'll put the my little story about the floods also in the links below, and I'll put a link to your channel, David.
Yeah, and what's your take on the floods? Because, you know, I have my own analysis and I've done my own research, but then, you know, you've also done research on the floods and what you think it's going to do. The number of people displaced, and I've seen a fair few incredible city photos already of the flooding. So, you know, they're being re-paralyzed by a lot of floods where people just can't get out of their homes, or city blocks are buried in mud, or it's completely, you know, inundated with waters clear up to the highway overpasses and whatever. So what are you seeing there, and what's your take on the floods coming up here and the damage on that?
Well, my take is that the numbers that we hear don't represent reality, because they like to underplay things. That this is very severe. It's at least a once in a 80 year, and I think it's worse than that from what I'm seeing, flood situation. So, but given you got so many people there and it's so intensive today, it's going to hit them a lot harder. We're more infrastructure reliant today than we were 80 years ago. Even in China, you know, they're using power tools, they're using modern farming techniques, they're using electricity, a lot of things that are reliant on the infrastructure that's going to be taken out in addition to the cropland. So it's just not the crops by themselves. You still have to think today about your supply chain. Supply chain is everything in the way our society is operated today. And a lot of people lose sight of that. But I would say they're going to lose a lot of their cropland. If we're planted late, given what you said, if they're also having pressure from locusts, they didn't plant up north as much because of the grand solar minimum impacts, I anticipate quite a food shortage. And when you displace that many people, you're going to have chaos. You know, we've had to displace people like Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina hit one city in America, New Orleans.
One city.
One city. We had people coming up here all the hotel rooms were full. We couldn't accommodate hardly the people from New Orleans in our vast country. So when you put it on that perspective of New Orleans, and you say New Orleans is all over the United States because there's more people in the Yangtze River Valley in China, 400 million, more people there than are in the entire United States. When you're impacting a number of people like that, as you said, if it's just 100 million of them, they don't get the whole valley. Everybody don't have to run and hide. Still, 100 million people is mind-boggling. Where do you put them all? How do you handle that? Everybody gonna be in tents? How are you gonna have enough tents? I mean, it'd be something makeshift. It look like the shanties in the Great Depression when people had to flee the Dust Bowl. It's going to be abject poverty. It's going to be a very ugly situation. I don't see how any powers that be over there could endure and survive. I do think they might try to take measures to keep in power. That's why I do worry about a wag the dog situation. Here's what I know about dictators and dictators' psychology is this. They didn't get there by being nice guys. They take out a lot of people on their way to the top, as you mentioned yourself. And that's just the MO. It's how it's done. When you do that, you're a target. You only maintain your power in that position by continuing to operate that way and keep those down that would challenge you. But when you get knocked out, you're mincemeat because you've got a lot of enemies out there. Once you're knocked out, you're not in the power. You can't do those things, and you're going to be. Look what they did to Mussolini. Think about it.
We could do 100 examples through history.
Bingo, exactly. When you are the person in charge of the country and you lose that power, you're history. You're toast. And they know it. They fear that. And the people that get there don't get there by being nice guys. They're typically, to be able to do the things they do to get the power they get, you can't be a person with empathy. And by definition, that's at least a sociopath, which means they have no empathy. At worst and more typical, a person at that level would be a psychopath. That means that they don't even care about their own country. They might be willing to take chances with their country if it means they got a better chance of surviving, of staying in power. So I think that's where the danger is when you have a country that allows tyranny to rule, when you don't have the freedoms that we're accustomed to in the West. And like you said, yeah, I agree. It was worse in history. Today they have the public eye upon them. Today they got the world eye upon them. They have to behave a lot better. Although there's people that will tell us stories about the Uyghurs and about the Falun Gong and how they are being imprisoned just because of what they believe, how they're being killed and having organs harvested from them. I hear a lot of stories. Maybe you'd want to expand on that. So by Western standards, they're not like we are. Not at all. And we try to project our way of thinking, our standards, thinking that they will be like that, and they're not. But, again, I agree with you. It's not the way it used to be, but that may be because they just can't afford to be that way now. And once they don't care, who knows?
Yeah, well, the displacement of the people, since the economies collapsed there and the export economies in shreds and shatters at best, and really nothing's recovered. They might say that it's recovered. And, one of the proxies they were using, this is back during the COVID, right in the middle of the lockdown in China. They were using the amount of electrical consumption as a gauge to how much economic activity was there and really how much manufacturing was going on. As the government was saying, oh, everything's increasing, you're like, wait a second, you're saying that, but there's no electrical consumption increases. So then after, they must have read Zero Hedge, the leadership over there, because shortly after that, they were requiring factory owners to go in and turn on the machines and leave all the lights on, even though there were zero workers in there, to give the facade of an increase in production. Now, with that said, each individual corporation and factory housing would house thousands of people. Like Foxconn, for example, they had dormitories for 10,000 people, and almost every single larger manufacturer had housing for 2,000 to 5,000 people to work in the factories on 3 shifts, rotating through 7 days a week. There's an enormous amount of those people that went back to the countryside and they never came back. So if there was a giant crisis where they needed to relocate 100 million people, they could at least at the very minimum start to utilize all those. There'd be a couple million factory dormitories that they could start with. Then they have the ghost cities, which apparently can house up to 10 or 20 million people. That still leaves you, 75 million people short, but at least it's a start. And then what would they do? Would they ask other countries to allow other Chinese in as refugees then? Would that be the case? Or I'm not sure how it's going to flow out that way, because they're very proud and they call that 面子, where they would lose face if they had to reach out and ask for help, because it means they couldn't take care of themselves. And that's a shameful thing that, you know, they had to ask for help on the governmental level. That would be beyond what you could expect as an answer for that. They would rather collapse into infinitum than ask the rest of the world for help in earnest. You know, a lot of countries do that. They have a major disaster and they ask for rescue teams to come in. Remember after the big earthquakes out in Sichuan and Dujiangyan and up that way, they had all those buildings collapse. Thousands of buildings collapse. Part of the whole country, such shoddy building, especially way out in the countryside and the mountain areas. So many people trapped, so many collapses of everything, and they wouldn't even let any international teams in there to help do search and rescue when they themselves didn't have enough search and rescue equipment, even with the military going up there. And, you know, instead of having professional search and rescue teams come in to help the military who was there on site, you know, they send in 500 guys, but then they're like, okay, what do we got to do? Get some rubble. They don't even know where the people are. They're just kind of unburying stuff until they find somebody, versus having all the search and rescue things in there, like they could have with the professional teams from all these other countries that could have sent them in individually, and they told everybody no.
Yeah.
That's just one single example, you know. I mean, I can't imagine if they were going to have to relocate 100 million or 200, even 50 million people. That'd be a very difficult feat how they would do it.
Well, even if they had a place to do it too, the logistics would be horrendous, especially given the floods and everything they're dealing with. It would be a horrendous prospect of how to pull that off. And
yeah, the railroad, let me go into the railroad tracks would be all inundated, and an enormous amount of people move by rail. See, the United States, you can't really comprehend how massive the rail network is, even into the smallest city in the smallest valley at the tucked away furthest place in China. There's a rail link to it. We don't have that here. So to exit an enormous amount of people like they do during Chinese New Year every year, I mean, the rail lines carry billions of people over a couple-week period. But in that whole central area, especially Wuhan, that's the center of the center. So that'll be inundated and underwater anyway. We've heard about this time and time again because of the initiation point of the virus there. But all around that periphery, you know, Wuhan connects to everywhere else. That's another major town that connects to another place. And those are all underwater on the rail tracks. So I don't know how they'd even move people out of there, because the roads would be underwater.
Wuhan
is underwater.
Crossroads of China, right? I mean, it's
crossroads right there. It's the center of the center of the center. It has been for how long now? How many emperors have come and gone?
All roads, you know, the Yangtze River too goes through Wuhan. That's why it's such a city. It is the crossroads of China for transportation, all kind of things. So,
you know, think about that river empties out down in Shanghai too. So back in the day when they did all that port embarkation in Shanghai and they transferred it upriver, there were no dams back then, so you could take it all the way up to Chongqing, clear up the river, all the way through the country, clear up to the western part, way up out near where the starts to rise up into the Himalayan basin out there. You just need to go Chongqing, and then you get up to Sichuan. But I mean, that's clear out west, all the way through the country on one river, but it's no longer possible.
Oh.
Well, except for the locks. It's not like it used to be where we can just take the boat straight up.
Like, they can move big ships to those locks. So they get farther up river now, since they got it backed up the way they do with bigger ships. So they help some in that regard. All right, so China's in a pickle. We know that. We're going to have to wait and see how it plays out and what it means to us. My advice to people is just to be ready, be prepared, not scared. Keep your eyes wide open and head on swivel. We don't know what's coming at us out of this. It's an unknown territory. Like I said, there may be opportunity in that we may see a change in the power structure there, and it may be one that's more friendly to us. There may be the peril that they may decide to go wag the dog. Now, David and I have both talked in the past about things like having prayer sessions and the power of intention collectively having a huge impact on where we go in society. I think that we might want to have some kind of coordinated prayer session or something to try to move this in the area of a better outcome for the people in China. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Emerald Forest, David. You ever see that movie?
Haven't heard of it, no.
In the movie, The Emerald Forest, it was made in the 80s, early 80s.
Is that an animated movie?
No. It's okay. It's a movie wherein they're building this big dam in Brazil. And one of the head engineers had his boy kidnapped by an Indian tribe known as the Invisible People. And he grows up and becomes a chief of the tribe. And suddenly the water is being backed up by the dam, and it's threatening the very existence of the tribe. And so they try to come up with a way to stop it. Now, to somehow the kid and the dad finally make contact again and get on fairly good terms. But and that's kind of an interesting story, backstory of the whole thing, I guess. But the tribe, in order to stop it, they meditate to make the frogs sing, because when frogs sing, it brings rain. If it get a big enough rain, it's going to take out the dam. And sure enough, the frogs started singing. If you've ever listened to my channel, there's a lot of frogs out here that sing. And so the flood waters came in. Of course, the dad went in and he helped out a little bit. He loaded dynamite all in the dam. But and indeed, the dam gets taken out. The Indian tribe saved. But it makes for an interesting movie. So it was kind of like their prayers, their meditations, their ceremony that they had brought the frogs to singing, which changed the outcome and saved their tribe. So I think today, I'm not saying that we should pray for taking out Three Gorges Dam. That would be radical, and it would put too many people in peril. That would go too far. But we could definitely meditate and pray that we have a more successful change in structure in China, so that it's a lot more friendly to us and better for the people there too. I think that would be a good outcome. So that's something to think about. All that said, let's change topics. We spent a lot of time talking about things over there. I do believe, and the reason we do that is because it can affect us here. And that's the way I see it. That's the biggest reason for me to want to pay attention. Of course, it's a humanity thing. The fact that you got 400 million people in peril is no mere slight consequence. That's huge, very huge. And just as a humanitarian thing, we need to pay attention to that. But it can affect us here. It can affect people all over the world. I have watchers, on my channel from every continent, except Antarctica. As far as I know, there may be somebody there to watch me.
They'll write you from the science research station.
It could be. I have known people that have went there. So it's possible that somebody will watch this channel. I've had friends there. Of course, being in the space stuff that I am, and a lot of things that's, not, unthought of. So aside from all that, what you're doing now is you're being proactive. You're starting your own farm. You might want to start a little backstory about how you were there and got out of there, and how you're starting your own farm, your own local tribe there in East Tennessee.
Yeah, I used to buy coffee down in Myanmar and saw some cold weather damage. It didn't make sense to me, because you're thinking Burma, cold weather damage on the coffee plants. So I started to put two and two together. I didn't know what I was looking for at first. We were just trying to do a, supply allocation, looking out 5 years if we could increase supply, just regular business stuff. Come to find out, that was the third year in a row that they were getting coffee damage by the cold. The bean density was getting less, because when the bean would freeze solid, and then with the little water spherules in there, when they would expand into a frozen, because when water freezes, it expands versus a liquid, but it would leave a gap in the bean. These were micro gaps though, but it still affected the density of the bean. So when the roasters would come to it, they would have the different, they'd been set. They knew the density, they'd set it for a certain roasting temperature, and then suddenly all their metrics were off. So when they would roast, it would be too hot because they were more porous and they weren't as dense. So the heat had a more drastic effect. This was the first thing we started to notice. And then the farmers were telling us about their great-great-grandparents when the British were there farming. This also happened to them, where they would lose the top leaves on certain types of altitudes that the leaves would get frosted on the top. All right, so then I started looking at John Casey's work, found out that this grand solar minimum was the reason for it. And I thought, all right, solar cycles, where are we going with this? And then, coming into this next one here, solar cycle 25, you're very familiar with that. You're probably better versed to talk about solar cycles because you were involved in the space program. But just from a novice point of it not being involved in a space program, I started to learn very quickly that not everything that you're being told about climate change is the real reason for the change. Now, then I understood it, that maybe the powers that be wanted you to think it was CO2, when in actual fact, it was the sun on a repeating cycle, that they couldn't do much about it, but they could give you the hope that you could do it if you stopped consuming this, or if you limited CO2 that. And, you know, again, it's about wagging the dog, getting people to direct the attention in a different direction. With all that said, these changes are real, to the point once the COVID came, I knew that was the end of it, because I was of the volition, and you can look back at many of my videos in the past. I said these 3 things are going to happen. One, they're going to lock down the planet. They're not going to let you move to different places because we're so cash rich in comparison. And we're talking about Western nations, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. You could pick up a handful of money and bail off to another country, and then, you know, you would completely upset the balance. If you had 400, 500 million people with money moving into impoverished nations where it would be easier to grow food and more bountiful food, that would completely upset the balance. So that was one of my things. They're not going to let that happen. I thought it was going to be an economic crash that would limit the mobility of people. You're seeing it wasn't. It was just so, but it still checks that box of locking down the planet.
Right.
Yeah. Secondly, is going to be the economic collapse and the re-emergence of something that's used as a tradable value that everybody agrees on has a certain value to still maintain global trade. And then the third is the skyrocketing food prices, which has caused civil unrest. So the police state since 9/11, I do believe, has been slowly trickled in to get us to this point where you're not really asking why there's so many police out on the streets. Why are they so militarized? Well, if you knew that people were going to riot for food, perhaps you'd need a more militarized police state without telling everybody. Because, you know, it's been a slow boil for like 20 years now. And how long, you wouldn't wait until the last minute to get everything ready for these events. You wouldn't just start, you know, 2018, all right, the police need more gear. You slowly trickle it in. And we've seen the slow trickle in now. Now's the point where action comes in. That includes me, personal action. So I left Asia with the realization that we're into the final phase and you need to get ready now, and there's no more time to prepare, and things are not going to go back to the same again. And you're just going to have to set up and start getting more self-sufficient pretty much instantly, and come together with community like you're talking about, Greg, there, and being able to work as a group to people, because you're not going to survive it by yourself. You're not going to sit in your basement for 30 years and eat canned food and pop out and be like, hey, I survived. You're going to have to be with a group of community, fresh, healthy food, heirloom seeds, fresh water. That includes wells, maybe pump wells. If the electricity goes out, you have to have access to water. So we live in less than 2 miles from a major, well, not, it's a major river in that area. It comes out of the Smoky Mountains and comes out, and it's the first, once it comes out of the mountains, it's 4 miles from where it actually terminates out of the mountains into a flat area. It's the biggest river around the area. Clean, clean water. Water table is only 200 feet. Some places 80 feet, depends on where you are in the range. Really close to a 2-acre lake. Got 4,000 acres behind us on the land back there. And it checks a lot of boxes for being more self-sufficient. We got over 5 acres of field land and 15 acres of woodland behind. And then on the periphery, once you go over, we're actually on a ridge top. The ridge top goes over the backside, and it's all woodlot on the back too. About 40 acres at least on the section that we have. All the neighbors have land too. They also have field land. So the total field land around there that the neighbors have outside our property is still a good 50 acres of field. It's well defensible. Everybody, it's a small community within the community itself. And it's about a mile from the Amish community. So setting up outside where the Amish are, because they're really self-sufficient. And it's way back just before you start rising up into the Cherokee National Forest. So when you get out on that periphery edge out there, I mean, if UN troops were coming in, that's the last place they would possibly go to. You know, it's so far back out in the countryside. Unless you know where you're going, you're pretty much way out there, you know. And that's kind of what we need. It's close to things, but it's still far enough out where you're way out. Like a tank of gas from any other major city, you're not going to find that before you run out of gas.
Hey, you got a great location. So
yeah, great location. And the whole hillside that we're on is full south facing. So greenhouses in winter, we can still grow food, everything. That was a huge and important thing. Like, which direction did the hill face?
Amen.
South.
I was on one of Rex's shows about, it's been over a year ago. We were talking about micro communities, and I showed him a valley in Colorado. It was over 10,000 feet up in a little town, not Telluride, I forget the name of it now, but I showed him this community, and I showed him the south facing hill I said, this is where you want to put your greenhouses because this is where the sun is. So, and I saw a property not far from here. It had a great price. I went and checked it out. It was on the north slope of a hill, and I go, nope, forget
No.
that.
Especially in winter, you know, the winters are going to get colder and a bit longer. So even if you think, yeah, well, the sun won't get enough heat, you probably won't. You probably won't.
Yeah, you need the heat and the light. There's not going to be as much light on that north slope. So
Yeah.
it's very crucial to be on the south slope if you can. That's the best place to be of any hill. So you really thought it out. You're doing a good job there, David. And you've got plans to farm it. And you're going to set up a farm. You're going to cover this on your channel in the future. That'll be an excellent thing to watch. And I will have a channel link to Adapt 2030 below to promote. And folks, go check him out. David's got an excellent channel there. He's covered this stuff for a long time now. And he's been for a long time telling everybody, you need to grow your own food, grow microgreens in your house. This is something he's been beating on for a long time, talking about the climatic changes, food supply. This has been his main topic because he's seen it based on the stuff he was trading there in Myanmar. So you want to say anything else about your place, your location, what you're planning to do?
Well, yeah, for those of you who've been following me for several years, you saw that balcony garden in the urban setting that I had over in Taiwan, in Taipei. Had a pretty large balcony and turned it into a food growing thing where we never needed to buy lettuce anymore, where we had an enormous amount of greens growing. We were using vertical tubes there on the balcony to show that you can do it even in a city environment if you had it, plus the microgreens. And I've been growing stuff for a long time. It's not like I just jumped in yesterday and said, oh, I want to get a farm. This is like, I've been doing this for quite some time, knowing that you'll have to have these skills. And coming together with the community too. Oh, and one last caveat. The amount of people going out looking for countryside land it's a seller's market now. So if you think you're going to go out and go, well, the land, I can knock these country people down on their price. Not really. They're going to knock you. They're going to frog gig you, as they say, because they know you want to get out there to get away from the cities. Like there's a tremendous exodus out of the cities right now. Luckily for us in the Southeast US, it's not as bad as being right next to New York City. Like the land price in Connecticut is unbelievable. The prices of land in Pennsylvania going out in the countryside is stupendous. And then California having this huge exodus where people are paying like $1.5 million for a few acres out in the wine country up there. Like what? But they have so much money when they're selling their city homes that when they come out, they're cash rich when they come to the country places. So most of them want a turnkey plug and play house, where I'm a little different, where we're going to put several different 1,000 square foot, tiny homes, if you will, out across the property in different ways and have a main house. So then there's multiple locations for people to stay. We're setting up areas so people can pull a camper up. There'll be electricity, water, and then drainage field out there and a septic for a couple different campers so people can pull up with their campers and just plug in with the electric and the water and have everything out there. So it'll be plug and play for several people to come and stay out on the property, but everybody gets their own space. You'll be 3 acres of your own little, 1,000-foot square thing with decks and balconies overlooking, but it's your own, 3 or 4 acres out there. But then the full farm field in front, everything looking down, easily defensible. So if you have a bunch of people out there, it's pretty easy to defend that with the positions that we set up. It's not about looking at the pretty view. It's about line of sight as well, And you got to start thinking like this. How much of the periphery of the property can you see? I mean, can you fully see your field? Because you don't want somebody coming in and harvesting everything that you've spent months and months growing. And can you defend the place? People coming from which direction are they coming in? Can you see the line of sight? Can you see, it's all about high positions and low positions.
Well, I have a concept for a home that you can live in, grow your food out of, make a living out of, all in your home. It's based on the DuByne family plot in Pasadena, California, in which they fed a family of 4 adults and sold food from to make a living. They grew all their own food except grains that they ate, and they sold. They made a living from 1/10 of an acre, 4 adults. Now, they lived simple, but they were very well adjusted and a very happy family there. The father's passed away, so it's just 3 adults living there now and doing that. I've done 2 videos on them. I've been there. They're wonderful people. It's like a religious survival, going to visit them. I've been to visit them, years ago when the father was alive, and I was recently back there, in fact, last December. And I scaled this home so that you're growing a little bit on the roof, because they actually had a 1/5 of an acre lot and they grew on a 1/10 of an acre in the backyard. So I thought, well, I could be more efficient with this, and I could build it like kind of similar to an earthship on steroids. It's not using the earthship design, except for certain principles which existed before then, for using a lot of thermal mass in the walls, putting it in the roof. It would also double as radiation shielding. So you would have a home that would be very durable. It would be a fortress. You could easily defend it. You would be growing most of your food indoors. And what food you did grow outdoors, you could much easier for patrol. Because from this home, you could have good, clear sectors of fire. Anybody who's been in the military will know what I mean by that, especially if you've been infantry. You will understand sectors of fire. You can definitely guard if you're on the proper location, like you said, where you have the vision where you can see. If you're at the altitude, right height, and you can see around in, your area, you can defend your fields, but you can have most of your food growing indoors. You can have your well indoors. You would be actually most of your power production would be indoors. You won't need much power with a home of that size and that type. So I've done some videos on the future. We can talk about this more going forward. You might be interested in building homes like this, analogs to it, or incorporating principles like this in what you build there. It can be done now. The guy who I forget his last name, Michael, I want to say Reynolds, but I may be wrong, who does the earthships, the guy who come up with that concept. Now, he really likes to recycle garbage as much as you can. That's a good thing, but if you're pounding dirt into tires, that's good if you've got a lot of free labor available. If you're paying for labor, it will cost you more than building a house like this. So the object, I think, would be to reduce the labor going into it so you can build them quicker. So I'm all for doing things like double sandbags, or if you got a sandbag, you can get them up to 18 inches wide. That would give you sufficient for thermal mass to accomplish the kind of objectives that we would have for this home. But you can add to that by, like I said, double sandbagging, putting a good berm up against it, having as much of it underground as possible, which depends on your water table. Now, you're in a mountainous area where it's well drained, you could really dig down deep. You could do real good in that territory, but a lot easier for you than some of us in the flatter country. So there's a lot to be said for that. You're in what sounds like an excellent location. Also, greenhouses, wallopinis that are somewhat underground would be good. And you could connect wallopinis to a home like this. You could, with a compound, actually build several homes like this together in one compound and have a mutual shared wall for defense on the outside, and have an inner courtyard for other use, be it growing more food or whatever you decide to do. But so that's something that I like to promote within this tribe network. Not to say that people would have to do that, because I think each tribe is going to be mainly determined by the landowner who brings people in to wherever they're at. Now, some people, groups will go in together and buy property. So that's one way you can acquire more property, or a good property that you could not ordinarily afford, would be if a group of people went in together. And by the way, those interested can email me. I'll write this down. And this is already in progress. And I've got a volunteer helping me pull the list together right now, because until I get my taxes done, I'm not going to have time to personally get involved in the email list. But I do have an assistant working it. And she's also working some other things, but she is working this, and she's returning some of the emails. She hasn't got everybody yet, but she's returned more than half of them. I'm going to redo this. I just messed it up. Give me a second. I'm just going to handwrite, and I will have it in the chapter, and then links below. I always put the links below, and people always ask me, Greg, where is this address at? Where's the email? So I just told you those are the links, but
in the description box below the video.
Yeah, but people have problems with that, so I'm going to put it right here. I put all kind of things there, and people will always ask me where they're at. But oh well, that's the way it is. So HAL5SPACE@AOL.com. That used to be one of my space emails. It's not my Green Greg's business email address. It's not my Power Grid Defense email address, but it is the address that I'm just using for this. That's all I'm using it for. Maybe I could have set up a separate email. I got some emails. I wasn't using that one right now, so I'm just going with that. So people can email me that so I know where you saw it through this program. Just say tribes saw you with David DuByne. And you can do that whether you saw me on my channel or when David should choose to put this up on his channel. So I hope you'll get this on your channel too, so we can get
Will
the word
do
out.
for sure.
So my main concerns are, of course, I am concerned for the food and our future. I'm concerned about our power grid. Our magnetosphere is dropping, as you're well aware. That's something you talk about yourself. That makes us more vulnerable to solar coronal mass ejections. When they do occur, even far weaker ones can take down our power grid. There's other things that can take down our power grid. I worry about some other power coming in, like maybe a China under pressure. It could be some other country that's going to be facing similar pressures, and that's going to be happening with the grand solar minimum. A lot of military posturing is going on around the world right now. It might be that this would happen anyway, just because of all the posturing that's taking place right now. We know that globally there's a lot of tension. The tension is ratcheting up. I think this does not help us with the aspects of that tension. So we have tension ratcheting up globally. We have tension ratcheting up domestically. And we got the prospects for less food. So to me, prepping makes a lot of sense. I also do advocate us getting involved to try to get our grid hardened, so that the prospects for some of these things are less. It doesn't cover everything. I've done videos, Dave, where I tell people to try to reach out to the other side to try to make peace in all these conflicts going on. I did a video called Rose-Colored Glasses, where I tell people to wear the rose-colored glasses to the other people, to try to see the world as they see it, and just try to understand it, just so that you can reach out to them. Now, that may be a bridge too far, but at least we're trying. But in the end, I agree with you. I do believe we're going to be in a strong position here in the Southeast, just because our culture is that kind of culture. It's strong. We believe in freedom. We believe in self-defense. We believe in the right to give arms to bears, if you know what I mean. You know, that's a little less dyslexic way of saying it, but you know what I'm talking about.
It'll get you past the prying ears.
I know those prying ears are getting smarter all the time. So, you follow what I'm saying here, that we have a lot coming at us. I do believe that we've got a good prospect of staying, surviving through this. The prospects of something that is going to hit us that's really bad, in my opinion now, is far better than it's not going to. I have a hard time seeing how we're going to avert some really bad things hitting us here. With just the way things are already collapsing and crumbling, the angst that's within our society, the angst that's in the world, the tensions that are ratcheting it up. I do think we're in a powder keg. And I think the powder keg is about to blow. I've done videos called the Powder Keg Nation, Powder Keg, or Powder Keg USA. And I did a video called Powder Keg Planet. And so I've just been looking at all these tensions as they just keep ratcheting higher and higher. At some point, that's going to let go. And if it lets go all at once, it's not going to be pretty. So that's why I've been encouraging people to do these things. So David, give me your take. You know, I'm talking too much. I'm interviewing you. So tell me, where do you really see this going? What do you see? Because I like to call this video problems in China, solutions in the United States. You know, something like that. That's kind of what I'm thinking. So we're having issues there. We have issues here, but we can also find solutions. Or maybe just call it problems and solutions. We'll kick it around a little bit. But
yeah, one thing is, you know, speaking of the supply chains, they've kind of cut off from China. So have you noticed in the stores? I've been out the last few days shopping for a few things, looking for a new chainsaw, because, you know, we talked about chainsaws there for a minute.
Yes.
There's an enormous amount of gaps in the shelves everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And even when we were out shopping, you know, who I was with was like, oh, yeah, there's still gaps everywhere. It's not getting better. The supply chain is not getting re-full. So if we go into a lockdown 2.0, which is anticipated this fall, whatever came and whatever was there, I mean, that's it, because China's not ramping up anything to start sending stuff back over. So your second best bet is hitting the garage sales here during the summertime and getting all the tools and all the things that you need. Estate sales, you can, you know, sign up for the estate sale auctions, or you can actually go to the estate sales in the homes themselves. There's an enormous amount of garage sales selling stuff, and you can go to farmers markets, and sometimes you can find people selling tools, pitchforks, axes,
Flea market.
shovels, hoes, all any of this kind of stuff, you know, pruners, pliers, snippers, trimmers, whatever. Wagons, you know, you can get a pulled trailer, whatever. There's a lot of stuff for sale. But after this summer, or after this winter, excuse me, I really believe we're kind of going to be locked off, and whatever we have is what we have. So try to get the hardened tool stuff that you can this summer. I don't think it's really going to be available, and it's going to fetch premium on prices moving forward.
That's
So
funny.
get what you can now.
It's funny you said it, because I was actually planning in the real near future to do a video on just acquiring tools.
Yeah, it's a super important thing. Super important. It can't be overlooked, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm always looking, I'm kind of a, you know, always looking through the garage sales going, all right, do they selling any tools? I look at the estate sales, because now you have the advantage of being online where all the estate sales will show you what they're selling before. So you don't have to waste your time to go to the place now. And you can bid on it on auction. Like I bid it on a couple vices, table vices. Didn't win the bid, but now I understand what I'm doing a little bit better. But I was looking for a couple table vices, and I should have just gone and bought it versus bidding online, because it sold before the bids came in. So somebody actually bought it from the location. So the auction online was null and void because somebody actually paid for it cash there, the price they're asking for at the house. So if you find the items that you're looking for, just go there and buy it straight away.
There you go. Well, the thing is, when it hits, all you're going to have is what you got.
That's it. And you're going to be stuck with what you got, and that's it. And everybody's going to hoard well, not hoard, but they're going to really keep it tight, close to the chest after that.
So this last go around, you could still go to the store. The store shelves might have been bare in certain things, but you could still go to the store, and eventually they got it. Now, or some things. There's some things that's never come back already.
Bicycles.
Yeah. You won't find this alcohol in Sam's Club. I had pallets of it because I use a lot in my organic farming operation, but I've gone through a lot of it, and so now I'm having to find substitutes. And so I'm trying to stock up on the substitutes, because I realize that we're about to lose access to that. Indeed, all you're going to have is what you got, and it's coming probably this fall, maybe as early as September. So folks, get ready right now. This is like the lull, the eye in the storm. You got hit by the first wave, that should be your wake up. Now is time to shore up what you've got. Now that you've probably now got some idea of what you really need, so shore it up. Get ready for the long haul. Get ready for you can't go back to the store. Get ready to survive with what you have.
And bicycles, those aren't coming back. There's, everywhere you look, the bicycles are in shorter supply. And think about China used to manufacture a lot of that. I mean, our manufacturing will come back once all that chain gets cut off, and then we realize that we need to start manufacturing back here again, or in Mexico, or somewhere in North America for the North American market. That's going to take a fair bit, because we're going to go into a collapse and a reset on the currency. There's going to be a lot more unemployment the second time if they really lock it down, or people can't go. You either set up in your home for a home business, or you're going to be out of work. And then what do they do with that? That number is going to keep growing and up and up and up. And how much longer can the Fed keep printing to try to keep up with that anger dollar amount? There's an equation there of how much money people get of free money from the government to how angry they are when they can't buy stuff. So when it comes up, the government is going to keep printing and printing and printing and printing and printing and printing more until people realize around the world that, you know what, the U.S. keeps printing too much.
At some point in time,
some point,
the wheels are going to fall off the train. And the train will go off the track. This train just cannot continue indefinitely with that game. There's a limit, and we're really pushing it hard. So
let me throw a point in there. Farm card. If anybody out there, if you register your farm as a business, you get something called a farm card. Now, you don't get charged sales tax when you go to buy equipment. You're null and void from the sales tax anywhere in the United States if you have a farm card. At the same time, Greg, what you're talking about, getting different things for farming needs, they're always stocked because the government makes sure they're stocked well before any retail outlets or stores. So to know somebody who's got a farm card or somebody who can get a farm card, you're going to be getting stuff at the co-ops and the farm supply co-ops and government's co-ops with your farm card long after everything's run out in regular retail outlets. They want the farming community to still grow food. Without food, it's going to be a total collapse. So the last stand is going to be your farm card in the co-ops around your counties and your communities. They'll be the last stocked places in America for you to get seed and tools. And then once that runs out, if it truly runs out there, then we're truly on our own at that point. I mean, it'll come back in the future. It's never going to stay at zero. It's never going to go to zero. But the time from hyperinflation event, which an ounce of silver, you could pay off half your house, if you time it right, where it skyrockets to, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for an ounce of silver. You got that tube that, you just cash it in and I'll pay it off cash, and then you're debt free. And then the reset will come and the metals will be reset to the new dollar value along with everything else. And your credit card balance will just roll over into the new dollar amount and reset by the banks again. But if you hit that hyperinflationary wave at the right time when it's running up, it's never going to run up to infinity. So look back at like Austria after World War I, and then Germany after World War II with the hyperinflationary events in Zimbabwe. And then you could see in Venezuela, like they ran along and then they ticked up and then and it flared off until everybody said, no, worthless money, reset. Like you want to hit it in that sweet spot. You're never going to probably pick the top on the hyperinflated value of something in paper. But along the way, if you see the hyperinflation hit, maybe you want to cash in a little bit of metal to pay off all your debt, because when it resets, your value on the metals will be super high anyway, comparatively. We'll reset back to where, like it was in 1920 or something, where $1 really could buy you $1 worth of value. Versus now, for that same $1, you're getting about $2 of value out of 100.
My dad was born in 21.
Yeah, so think about a $1921. What could you buy for $1 in 1921? You could actually go to a grocery store and come out with like an enormous amount of food.
Everything you needed. I mean,
for $1.
A pair of pants for a nickel.
Yeah, right. I did that video where I was talking about the most finely woven, hand-sewn, hand-done dresses. Beautiful, elegant, thick wool, all for the entire outfit, thick wool and everything, $6.95. That was in 1940. Because somebody had put the Sears catalog prices on one of those articles I was reading off Zero Hedge, and it was the finest of the finest fabrics, hand sewn, beautiful inlace, like mother of pearl buttons all the way down, just elegant, just dripping elegance, like $6.95.
That was a lot of money. Most people could not afford that.
Yeah, that's true. It wasn't. Yeah, truly, it wasn't, because they were saying back then, if you were getting 10 cents an hour for a wage. Think about that today. If you're getting 15 bucks an hour, some places 20, depending on, like California, you get higher price. If you're working an 8-hour day, you're getting $160. Back then, if you're working an 8-hour day, you got 80 cents. So working for 10 cents an hour, working for 15 bucks an hour, you can see how much our money has been deflated in value, inflated away, into nothing, where the same 160 bucks was equal to 80 cents back then. So what's that in the increase?
Yeah, and that's nothing. Just raising the minimum wage is just going to inflate the money even more. I mean,
Even more.
You're not going to buy any more with it. It's just going to be buying it much less. But you're also putting incentives in for the businesses to automate instead of paying you that extra wage. But still, the dollar is important for one thing. You can vote with it. Every time you spend one of these is a vote. And a lot of the things that Dave and I have been talking about, supply chains and buying things from China, I say support your local farmers, support your local growers, support your local artisans. Use your dollar to support the locals. Let's get out of this globalism. It's truly not sustainable. It is what the powers that be sell as the idea of sustainability, but it's not. It can't survive a global grid down. It can't survive all kinds of situations, and it's not good for us. Support your locals, buy local as much as you can, wherever you're at, whatever country you're in. Support your people, buy local, because it is more sustainable in the long run, and it helps your neighbors, your family, and it's a supply chain that's a lot shorter. So the more you do that, the better off we all are in the long run. Do you have any closing thoughts, David? Is there anything that we've not covered that you want to say? Something sticking in your craw, or some pretty way to wrap this up?
Yeah, and again, buying local, you start to know all the farmers. You start to know the food supply chain within your local vicinity, because if you're going to buy from the producers, you know where they are, and they're the ones that have the food. Supermarket could run out, but your local producers are still going to have, because the supermarkets have fallen sort of into the same trap where they're getting vegetables from California, but you're getting your farmers from 2 miles down the road for the person who's growing them. At the local farmers market, you're 4 miles, 5 miles from there. So everything will be grown locally. And if you learn how to grow your own food, you can grow it locally for yourself. And one last thing, when the CEO of Airbnb, I was reading this article today, comes out and says that travel is never, ever going back to the same way it was ever again in our world. When that CEO from that company comes and tell you the travel industry is completely finished pretty much for the rest of your lifetime, something's definitely changed where the shift has already occurred. Now it's just playing out in real time here.
Well, David, just think about it. As long as this bug's out there or something like that, who wants to travel the way they used to? People don't want to do it. People don't want to go to restaurants the way they used to. I mean, you can open everything back up as much as you want, but the customer clientele base will never be the same. And you know, there's been irreparable damage done to some of these companies and networks financially. I just don't. I'm already there. I just don't see that coming back, not in any way that we recognize.
Yeah, so understand mentally too. It took me a little while. The mental shift of the old world's gone, completely gone. The new one started, and you're going to have to clip that old one as much as you don't want to. You're going to have to snip it clean, because that's going to be the hardest part, is this mental game of understanding that the world shifted. It's never going back to the way it was. So to hold that even tiniest hope that it'll go back to the way it was, it's just not going to.
So here's the challenge. The real challenge is the world that it will be is yet to be determined. There may be people that want to push it in one direction, the powers that be or whatever, but they don't always get their way. In fact,
we have thoughts too.
Don't.
The global populace has a thought as well.
And there are various groups pushing things. There are people rioting and burning cities. Does that mean they're going to get their way? I think not. They might in some pockets in some areas, like maybe Seattle, but that's not going to wash in other areas. And I don't see them prevailing in the end. But so that's just it. We need to stick together. This is why we need to stick together and start working together, is so that we can take this to a better outcome, that we can have our networks, our tribes, our communities, that we can do what we can for our states, local governments, and the country as much as we can. We'd like to keep this put together if we can possibly do it. But should that fail, we need to secure as much as we possibly can in terms of peace and prosperity, preservation of freedoms, our ability to grow our own food. And in my mind's eye, that requires you have to be on your own property. Because if they take us all off our property, put us on collectives, then you lost everything. You're nothing. And your prospects just went to nothing.
Yeah, you want to have that peace of mind, because if they do try to say, well, if you're a renter, I've heard this coming through a couple conversations. They said if you're renting a place, then you don't own it, so you'll have to be taken out of there, and whatever they do at that point, if you're a renter, you don't have any ownership. But if you're on a deed, or you actually paid in full and you're just paying property taxes on a place, at that point, they're not allowed to remove you from your land. Now, I've heard this before. You brought it up, and I've heard this in passing in discussion. So, you know, having that, or being able to get out to a parcel where somebody's there that'll protect you and say, my land, you're not allowed to come here. You know you're not. We own it, and you can't say a thing about who's here, and just hide up in the woods until the inspectors are gone or whatever. This whole contact tracing too, I'm hearing stories about people coming door to door in California. It'd be really difficult to go door to door out in the countryside because A, there's so many dogs out there. B, people are super spread out. Like, you know, you come out there, I don't even know how contact tracers would even find your house without trespassing on your land, walking, 20 minutes up a field somewhere to even find where the first resident's house was. A lot of things to think about. Oh, and also one thing with the pond that's near our property, this guy, there's some algae growing on the pond, and I was going to ask him if I can go take all of his algae out of the pond, because just a little secret for those of you, in the reason the algae is floating on top of the water is there's oil in that. Now that oil could be squeezed and to turn into algae biodiesel, or you can actually turn it into cubes and then burn it in wood itself to get a much higher temperature. So if you're looking for things that could raise the temperature in case you have to do metallurgy or something, because aluminum melts much easier than something like steel. So if you need to do some basic metallurgy to get a much higher temperature than wood can provide you, you definitely want to be finding the algae and know where the algae ponds are around you or where the algae grows. To get that, dry it out, and then you can squeeze it into bricks or something that you could add into the charcoal. or you actually want to take that, and if you get an abundant amount of it, and if you have an oil press, you should be able to squeeze oil and get real oil out of that, which you could turn into algae biodiesel. Now, again, that's just something that I worked with way back in the day before I was in Myanmar. So little familiar with what algae and the potential of that is. So there's many ways to think about just the natural things around you. You don't have to just cut trees and burn them for wood or heat or whatnot. Algae.
Good point. Good point.
And I'm off. That's it. That was my wow outro there.
I love it. Actually, I have a blacksmith's forge. I haven't set up a blacksmith shop for it.
You need one of those. Like, how many people have that? That's a lost art form. You might not have the skill, but if somebody else has a skill and they're like, man, you got the forge, I know how to do some stuff. Boom, you put them together. You might not have the skills to use all the tools, but if you have the tools, there's probably somebody that has the skill to use the tools, and that's it, you know?
I have the tools. I've played with it years ago. I've not done anything in a long time, so I'm not going to claim skills, but I have ran the forge way back when. It needs some repair work, but I've run it. So it's old though. It's an old forge. It belonged to a blacksmith who retired from the trade when I was about 16. I bought his forge from him. He was in his 80s. He actually made a good living off that forge. So.
And a scythe also, you know, if you're going to be harvesting grain and you don't have a machine to go out and do it like we do now with the combine going through, you're going to have to scythe that down. And you need that anvil right there to pound that thing out every day to get it all sharp again.
I have 2 scythes, by the way.
Do you? See, old school, you're going to have to think like a pioneering lifestyle. You truly are.
Yes.
Truly are.
Go get cook pots, the big black pots they use.
Yeah, the iron ones, yeah.
Amen. Go get the scrub boards. Get used to the idea of having a life with no power. You know, people do want to protect their electronic devices, and they're going to be good for a while until they wear out. At some point, all these devices and machines will wear out if the system don't get restarted. So just be prepared. Learn to live without it. And, then if it comes back, good, fine. But, that's why I tell people, go out with hand tools. You get used to using hand tools, digging and cutting. I do have, I got a crosscut saw, a couple of them. So actually 3.
Man, you don't believe how quickly your arm gets tired. If you're not used to using a saw, you're not going to be, you cutting down some trees, some limbs off that. You're taking a break like halfway through cutting the limb. You're like, no way, it's only halfway cut.
Well, our ancestors ate the same kind of meals as somebody training for the Olympics. That's how hard they worked. A lot of people today don't understand or appreciate that. Our ancestors scrapped. They worked really hard for where they got. And we're going to have to get back to that. So we need to start training and get used to it. And a big part of it is right up here. It's mental. So you got to have the resolve in your head. Anyway, David, it's been great.
Yeah, good conversation. I really do hope everybody got something out of this, because the world, it is changed. There's a lot of variables going over. China's one thing, but taking care of your own food growing sovereignty, because the more you're off the system, the less control they have over you to get you back in there. Because as we go through this 2.0 lockdown, they're going to make you have the tracking thing on your phone. You're going to have to get your temperature every day before they'll even let you in a store.
Yeah,
so if you could forego.
I got a pouch to put my phone in so they can't track it. I got this from Rex, by the way. He sent it.
Oh, did you? Yeah. And you're going to have to go through hoops to get in stores. But if you don't have to go to the stores for fresh vegetables and things you can grow your own or trade with other farmers, that puts you one step away from the control mechanism.
Right. Get away from the hive. I tell people the goal of my channel is to help you thrive, survive, and stay out of the hive. That's the hive. And we want to stay out of the hive and stay alive. So the solutions are grow your own food as much as you can. Grow indoors as much as you can. Build greenhouses. These are things David's been saying for years. Vote with your dollar. Vote local. Take steps to get the power grid hardened, and work to join communities and tribes, local survival communities, tribes. There's several solutions. We're not in here talking just problems. We're telling you what the problems are so you can appreciate why you need to enact the solutions. But if you're not seeing that now, then I'm not sure you got eyes to see or ears to hear, because the world's falling down around us. And this should be the wake-up call, the clarion call to take action. So do it now. There's no time to waste. This is the calm of the storm. This may be your last best chance to get ready. Hopefully you've already been ready, and to a large degree. I hope you've already been prepping. but you need to shore it up now. This may be your last chance to get those last items shored up and to start forming the networks of the people you're going to need to have your back. And again, we're trying to help people with that, with this. And I will get more involved in this personally once I get some other things behind me here. I got several things I got to knock out, but we're going to be back online. I do have an assistant. She is sending out the emails. We are coordinating this. We're building a spreadsheet. There's a few people we hadn't got back to yet. Most of those are people I want to talk to personally for various reasons. So I will be getting to you. All that said, David, it's been great having you on the channel again. I hope we can do this more in the future. We went long this time, but we had a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, and the heirloom seeds, please, True Leaf Market was even putting out a notice that they've run out of certain varieties of seeds. So, when one of the major seed suppliers in the United States with heirloom seeds is sending out notices that we've already run out of this, we can't get you that this season, you want to order some seeds, trueleafmarket.com, because they have the best. And you want to get seeds. More seeds, the better. Even if you need to put them over here on the side and hold them, you will use them for sure.
Yeah, and use my link. If you're watching this on my channel, use the link.
Yeah, use the link below on Greg's channel here.
And if you're watching on David's channel, use his link. We both.
If you're watching on my channel, you're still going to use Greg's link.
Oh, thank you, David.
Of course, man. Of course.
You're a champion. All right, guys. If you stayed in here and watched this long, just tell me the pen is mightier than the sword. That way I'll know you've been watching.
Thank you for watching and your attention and your time. We're all in it together.
And you know what? It is, because you can write or type to your congressman and demand action on many things. And it does help. It does help. I've had some interesting successes with that. So, David, once again, thank you for being on the channel. I would like for you to hold on for just a minute. And to everyone that's watched this long, really a very hearty thank you for watching. And again, let me know, pen is mightier than the sword. Thanks, folks. Really appreciate it. And have a wonderful, wonderful week.